Welcome! How y'all doing tonight? Tuesday night? It's exciting. I'm excited to be here. I'm glad you all are here too. My name is Flaherty. I work at the Sustainability Institute at UNH. Thank you, Herb. So I'm here to welcome y'all and to give you a sense of how tonight's event is going to go down and get the show on the road. So, buckle up. First off, we are going to have a couple folks from UNH talk about our efforts to create an inclusive campus. We're going to have the interim associate VP for community equity and diversity, Monica Chu. She will be saying a few words. And then my colleague Karen Speller, who is the Thomas W. Haas Professor of Sustainable Food Systems, is going to be talking to y'all about the 21-day Racial Equity Challenge, which I hope you have heard of. If you haven't, you will. April 1st to the 21st. It's going to be a good time. Then we will hear from Kayla Cares, who is a junior biomed major. Kayla is going to be introducing Leah. We have this talk, and we have a performance by her friend, Taina Asili. And then we will have some time for a Q&A. And at the end of the night, if y'all want to buy a book, we have books for sale, Leah's book for sale. Cool. So, before we start, I just want to take a moment to thank some folks. First off, I'd like to thank, we'd all like to thank the Abenaki people on whose land we are gathering tonight. I'd also really like to thank the co-sponsors for this event. We have the MUB and MUB Board of Governors, Food Solutions New England, Cooperative Extension, Office of Community Equity and Diversity, and the Office of Multicultural Student Affairs. Can we just give it up for all our co-sponsors? This event would not have been possible without them, and it was my pleasure to work with all the folks in those offices to make this event the success it will be. So, thank you all, and I'd like to invite Monica Chu to come to the stage now.
Good evening, everyone. I'm supposed to talk about community equity and diversity. I thought I was supposed to pick up on the theme of race and farming. And I have to say thank you to the UNH Sustainability Institute for introducing us to that mesh among equity, food, and race. So I was thinking to myself, you know, I don't know much about farming, and I certainly don't know much about farming while black. What do I know about farming while Asian or Asian American? Not that much either, but I know the history of Asian farmers coming to America. And I'm not going to give you a long history. I have only a tiny little piece of paper with a few scribbled notes. But what I will say about farming while Asian is that the Chinese, who were some of the first immigrants to come over were some of the first Asian immigrants to come over to Hawaii, were the strike breakers for the indigenous Hawaiians, who threw down their shovels or whatever you use when you farm sugar cane or pineapple, and they said they weren't going to farm anymore. So the Chinese were cheap labor, and after the Chinese threw down their shovels, the Japanese became cheap labor, and after the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, we had the Japanese come over, and so on and so forth. So we have a history of Asians who are doing farming. And I also wanted to leave you with one small fun fact that has to do with Asian American farmers. In 1875, there were two farmers in California, one whose name was Seth Llewellyn, and the other was Ah Bing, a Chinese man. And they created a graft of the new cherry that we did not call the Llewellyn cherry, but we called it the Bing cherry. So those of you who eat Bing cherries, it comes from a combination of labor between a white man and an Asian, a Chinese man. So with that said, I just, you know, I want to say that this brief history made me think that there was a lot of community among, let's say, the Chinese coolies, as they were called. There was a lot of diversity as the many different Asian communities came through, but there was not a lot of equity. So that was my plug for community, equity, and diversity. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing what I can learn about farming.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening. Right. Oh, so excited to be here. Leah, thank you for being here in this space at this time. It is so important that when we're thinking about equity, racial equity in our food system, that we're really thinking about that together. And one of the things, Food Solutions New England, you heard their name. It's been 5 years now that we wanted to find a way to build skill and will around racial equity in the food system so that we all would be able to be allies and accomplices in undoing racism in our food system. And it was a process for us to learn together, to explore together, to lean in together. And it's messy, and it's not always easy, but we made that commitment. As Food Solutions New England is a regional food system network, it is very fortunately backboned, coordinated by University of New Hampshire Sustainability Institute. Let's give them a shout out. When we're thinking about our journey, and it is a journey, it's not a destination around racial equity and undoing that we have allies and partners that will step out in front to pave the way, right, left, to steady us and push us forward. So the 21-day Racial Equity Challenge, as Colleen mentioned, is April 1st to 21st. It is a web-based, interactive tool. People sign up, which we're going to ask you to do over there. And also here is the card to give you the link. It is a way that individually you take that step in. And for 21 days you receive a prompt through the email that gives you some thought questions, something to think about, something to explore and again lean in. We have an online chat that allows you to share your thoughts with other people in that process. We have resources connected with that and continuing to build the community. And as you at UNH contribute and participate in that, you're going to be joining thousands across the country who have been involved in the last 4 years. So this is our 5th year. We're so excited because we also had the blessing, and I call it a blessing, for Dr. Eddie Moore Jr. of the Privilege Institute, and Debbie Irving, the author of Waking Up White, to give us permission to adapt that to food system and our transformation. Because really, when we talk, and Leah's going to talk about that, at the core of our racial issue, the undoing racism, is around our food. So, invite you to lean in, invite you to consider the 21-day Racial Equity Challenge as a place to learn, grow, and build a community. And I say not allies, and allies are people that say, yeah, we're behind you, but we want accomplices again, like I said, they're going to step in front of you, side of you, and back of you to push you forward, and they become your tribe on the journey. Again, it's a journey, not a destination. So the card is here, the email website is here, there's a place to sign up over there, so please, 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 consider the 21-day Racial Equity Challenge as a tool and an advocate, ally, and an accomplice in your journey for undoing racism in our food system. Thanks so much.
Karen, and for the Racial Equity Challenge. It's going to be a good time. Super great learning experience. And now, it's my pleasure to welcome Kayla Cares.
I am Kayla Cares. I'm a junior biomed major. I am so excited to see such a fantastic turnout for a talk about agriculture and social justice. This is so exciting on UNH's campus. So I am a biomed major, which may have you wondering why I'm up here for a talk about ag. I'm really passionate about ag. I'm actually pursuing a career as a food animal veterinarian, hopefully. And I'm the 2019 president of UNH's Sigma Alpha chapter. Sigma Alpha is a professional sorority which promotes leadership of women in agriculture. Sigma Alpha was founded in 1978 by 5 women at the Ohio State University who felt a little little bit left out of opportunities for agricultural leadership development and decided to create their own. And so we're so excited to be continuing their legacy here at UNH in 2019. When I sat down for this year, knowing that I was going to be president of Sigma Alpha, I made a little bit of a bucket list, and I went through all the events that were happening at UNH, and one of the first things I found was Leah's talk that's happening tonight. And I knew that we had to be here, and I had to try to connect with Leah, and she was so gracious. She actually ate dinner with us tonight. We got to know her a little bit better, and I'm so excited for everyone to hear about how Leah is promoting agricultural leadership to minority groups in her community. So I'm going to read you a little bit about Leah. So Leah Penniman is the co-director and program manager of Soulfire Farm in Grafton, New Hampshire, New York. Leah uses all gender pronouns. Leah has been, for over 20 years, a soil steward and food sovereignty activist, having worked at Food Project, Farm School, Many Hands Organic Farm, Youth Growth, and with farmers internationally in Ghana, Haiti, and Mexico. She co-founded Soulfire Farm in 2019 with a mission to reclaim our inherent right to belong to the earth and have agency in the food system as Black and brown people. Her areas of leadership at Soulfire include farm training, international solidarity, food justice organizing, writing, speaking, making it rain, and anything that involves heavy lifting, sweat, and soil. And so you've heard enough from me, and I would very much like to welcome Leah to the stage.
Peace family, how you doing? So I feel so honored and grateful to be here. And it's the tradition in our farm and in our family to always start with deep gratitude. So the first gratitude is of course extended to each of you. You know, you're taking the time out of your evening to be here to talk about racial justice, and farming and food means that you care deeply about something that's bigger than yourselves. And I see you for that, and I commend you for that, because you could be like Netflix and chilling right now, but you're here, and I value it very much. I also want to give thanks to the ancestors. In particular, I want to call one of my ancestors. She's my grandma's grandma's grandma, and her name is Susie Boyd. Now, Susie Boyd lived in the Dahomey region of West Africa, what is now Ghana, in the 1700s. And she was watching people get picked up and kidnapped all around her at that time period. All the expert agriculturalists getting picked off and shipped to some faraway place with no report backs. And so her community, they went and fled to the mountains, a mountain called Provo Mountain, where I've had the privilege to go and visit and plant maize upon. This is where they fled to try and fortify themselves. But it was really of no use because folks came and just kept stealing their bodies for the labor, the promise of labor. And I think a lot about what I would do in that kind of situation. What kind of fear would overtake me, despair. But what she did, and what the other women in the community did, was they gathered up their okra, their cowpea, their sorghum, their millet, their black rice, their egusi melon, their molokia seed that they'd been saving for generations. And they made a thick part in their children's hair and hid the grains in the braids, believing against odds that there was a future wherever they were going. And that I would exist and need to inherit that seed. So I call Susie Boyd into the room because she's an example of not giving up on our descendants even when times are tough, which is something you need to know. And I invite you also in this moment to think of an ancestor that had foresight for you. Call their name into your consciousness, and at the count of 3, we are going to say their names loud and proud in a way that honors them. 1, 2, 3.
Amen.
Ashe, thank you. I also want to echo the thanks to the Abenaki, the original friends of this land, as well as thanks to the Mohican Nation, the original friends of the land that Soulfire is on. And I know it's become almost, too easy to do that naming. But I think it's important that we go beyond that, that we really ask ourselves not just how do we acknowledge, but also how do we be accomplices, allies in solidarity with the First Nations people upon whose stolen land we grow our food, unless we happen to be Abenaki in this room. And I was very, very privileged just a couple days ago. I came back from the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohican Reservation in Wisconsin, where folks had been forced marched 2,000 miles from our farmland to the barren, desolate, denuded landscape of northern Wisconsin, and was able to exchange seed and friendship and resource and listening. So I encourage all of us to be in solidarity. And my final thanks I want to give before getting into the storytelling is to my team, Because we have this little kind of disease in the United States where we think that movements are about one person, like Martin Luther King equals the Civil Rights Movement, things like that. But of course, anything worth doing takes a team. And the reason that I can be here tonight talking to you all and telling stories is because someone else is feeding the chickens and putting in the seedling tables and doing all things that need to be done. So I just want to shout out Larissa and Demaris and Letitia and Jonah, on and on, our whole board and everybody, so thank you. So in my maternal homeland of Haiti, when it's time for a story, we have a call and response. And the storyteller says, creek. Anyone Haitian in the house? Woo! What do you say back? Crack. Yes! So then everyone wants to hear the story says crack. So we're gonna try that. Creek. Crack. Creek. Crack. Beautiful. We're going to take a journey through history because to understand why we're even talking about race and food, because that doesn't seem like it's connected, we need to understand how the food system got to be the way it is. And I will argue the food system is not broken. It is working exactly as it was designed. If you were to imagine the food system as having DNA, right? That double helix, one strand would be stolen land, and the other strand would be exploited labor. So we're going to go through that history, and it's sad and it can be jarring, but then we're going to also talk about what Soul Fire Farm's doing, what are other black and brown-led farms doing to correct and heal the food system and how you can get involved. So don't despair, there's a part. My sister made this beautiful painting, we have some posters of it, that shows that moment, right, of the seed braiding in the hair. And what I love about this poster is it made me think about my own mother braiding my hair and it takes a while, right? And so what would happen during the braiding would be the passing of culture, a story. And so I imagine my grandma's grandma sitting there doing this and saying, child, it's not just seeds I'm putting into your hair. Here is all the knowledge of how to be in right relationship with the earth. Because black folks, our relationship with farming isn't just slavery. It goes back at least 10,000 years, and a lot of the things we as sustainable farmers think of as ahistorical, like raised beds, cover cropping, terraces, livestock, rotational grazing, chickens themselves, fermentation, work parties, credit unions, land trusts, a lot of these things that we think of as ahistorical actually are Afro-Indigenous knowledge that was braided and brought over and became infused in the U.S. food system. The challenge is that the project of capitalism and colonialism isn't just take a bunch of stuff and steal it. It's also to make us forget who we really are. So a big part of the healing will be remembering, which we'll get to later. Does anyone know this picture? What is it?
The painter's name is glass.
Yeah. What is it of? Do you know?
Western progress.
Yeah, exactly. Manifest destiny, I heard some people say. So it's an 1800s picture, but this idea of manifest destiny goes way back. It actually goes back to 1455. Pope Nicholas wrote one of those scrolls called the Papal Decree that said, white Christian nations go forth, colonize, enslave, and pillage non-Christian heathen nations. This was the beginning of the age of discovery, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, all that, right? All that colonization was because folks at the time, the Spanish, believed that God had given the blessing for this. And it assumed the inhumanity of people who were non-Christian and non-white. So that started in 1455, but it actually became part of US law. So if you look at the 1823 McIntosh Supreme Court case, this so-called doctrine of discovery, nicknamed Finders Keepers Law, was upheld by the Supreme Court. as part of the Indian removal process, saying Native folks aren't really quite people, right? They're not these sovereign nations, they're domestic dependent nations. And so if a white European had planted a flag in a place, that meant that that sovereignty was lost, treaty or no treaty, right? This doctrine of discovery continued to be upheld by the Supreme Court. Any idea most recently when it was upheld? 2005. 2005, the Oneida Nation in my state of New York sued to get some of their tribal lands back and were denied based on the doctrine of discovery, manifest destiny, all of this. And so it's not old history, right? People are still losing their land, it's never been given back. And that formed that first strand of the food system. The idea that the land was never paid for, it was never compensated, it was taken. And then the second strand of the double helix is, of course, slavery, enslavement. So 12.5 million African people survived the transatlantic journey. About 6 or 7 million ended up here in the United States. And something really profound about this that I didn't know until I read Judith Carney's work on black rice was that folks weren't just taken for their brawn, right? Europeans at the time lived in a temperate climate, were used to temperate agriculture. And so to grow food in the southeast of the United States and the Caribbean and Brazil, that was really something else. So they needed to find agriculturalists who knew how to navigate that type of terrain. So that rice growing in the Carolinas that generated trillions of dollars of wealth, that was from Mende rice growing technology brought over, right? It wasn't English technology, it wasn't Irish technology. So there's the two strands of the double helix. And I was always taught that, you know, after 1865, we're cool though, right? Like everything is fixed, like Native folks are good, black folks are good. But there's more to the story. Like, does anyone know what this picture represents?
Prison workers.
Yeah, exactly, prison workers.
Angola?
So this is right after 1865, something really important happened for black folks in particular. What was that? End of the Civil War, 13th Amendment, Emancipation Proclamation, right? The end of slavery, shadow slavery. But of course the South had a total freak out because they were gonna lose their labor for the plantations. And so there was a lot of pushback. And what they figured out was that there's a loophole in the 13th Amendment. And I'm not being sensationalist, you can literally Google it and read it. It says, you know, slavery's over except in the case if you've been convicted of a crime. So the prisons, especially around harvest time, suddenly fill with African descended people. And not because folks started raping and pillaging and murdering. It was because a whole new set of laws came onto the books called the Black Codes. And the Black Codes, for the first time, made it illegal, if you were black, to loiter. Loitering means standing around. Right? Vagrancy became a crime. That means not having a job. Not stepping off the sidewalk for a white person. Being not upright and honest. So there's all these new crimes that go onto the books that make it really easy to criminalize and gather up people. So the prisons just filled. And this was not a small thing. In 1966 to 69, Alabama, 63% of their state budget came from leasing black people back to the plantation. And the state made the money, you know, so the plantation owner didn't have the incentive to even keep you alive. So the death rate soared, and we were in a whole phase of neo-slavery in the late 1800s. Of course, the folks who weren't in jail and getting sent back to the plantation were many times still on the plantation as sharecroppers. So sharecropping is a debt peonage system where the plantation owner continues to own the home, the crop, the mule, the tools, and the farmer, the black farmer, is in debt to them and under contract obligated to pay off. In most cases, sinking deeper into debt each year because of the way that system worked. So we still had a system based on stolen land and exploited labor well into the early 1900s. And then something astounding happened. Any guess what was the year of the peak farmland ownership for black people?
1864.
1866.
Good guess, 1867, anyone else? A little later than that. It's 1910. So in 1910, what's amazing, you think about sharecropping, which is hard for a lot of us to imagine. Folks still managed to save up what they called their Sunday money, you know, from going and working as a cobbler or doing horseshoes or whatnot on Sundays, and purchased 16 million acres of land. They purchased 14% of the nation's farms, even though black folks made up 9% of the nation's population. It was an astounding feat in the face of what people were dealing with. But there was another freak out in the South, because what happens if black people stop being sharecroppers and they start having their own farms? Yeah, feed themselves. There's economic collapse where the labor's gone again. Right? And so 1910 also happens to be the peak of white supremacist violence in the South. Not a coincidence. There were 4,500 people lynched, and the majority of them were either owning land or attempting to save to buy land. In other words, they were getting too uppity and they were disrupting the status quo in the South. 4,500 is a lot of people to be driven off their land and terrorized off their land. But I want to read you the story of just one person to humanize that really big number, because the Associated Press did a whole case study on this last year. So this story is David Walker's. After midnight on October 4th, 1908, 50 hooded white men surrounded the home of a black farmer in Hickman, Kentucky, and ordered him to come out for a whipping. When David Walker refused and shot at them instead, the mob poured coal oil on his house and set it afire, according to contemporary newspaper accounts. Pleading for mercy, Walker ran out the front door, followed by 4 screaming children and his wife carrying a baby in her arms. The mob shot them all, wounding 3 children and killing the others. Walker's oldest son never escaped the burning house. No one was ever charged with the killings, and the surviving children were deprived of the land their father died defending. Land records show that David Walker's 2.5-acre farm was simply folded into the property of a white neighbor. The neighbor sold it to another man whose daughter owns the lands today in 2019. So I was always taught, you know, that the Great Migration, when 6 million black people went from the South to the North, was a search for opportunity. And while that's part of the story, every migration has a push factor too. And so I've learned to understand that the Great Migration was a refugee crisis. You know, that people were fleeing from violence on the attempts to own their own farms and their own houses and have a life of dignity was a threat to the status quo in the South, and there was a mass exodus. So the United States had an opportunity in the early 1900s to really reckon with that and make a change. But instead, it said, well, you know, this whole food system's been based on stolen land and exploited labor, we might as well keep with that. And as it was pointed out earlier, actually the first so-called migrant farmers or guest workers in the United States were Japanese, Chinese, and Filipino in relatively small numbers. And there was a big shift in 1940 toward the food system relying almost exclusively on the labor of brown people from elsewhere. Does anyone know what happened in 1940 that just rocked the food system? The Bracero program. The Bracero program, now called the H-2A program, or the guest worker program. At the time, it brought in about 200,000 workers a year, and it's increased, you know, ever since. And so, the thing with the Bracero program, or H-2, or farm workers, is that we actually don't have the same labor protections. So in 1935, when the New Deal was passed and all of this amazing, you know, for the first time we have a limit to the workday, we have a right to a day off in 7, we have Social Security, the right to unionize, overtime pay, all of these incredible things, child labor laws and other labor protections. The Southern Democrats at the time were like, oh, we're not voting for that, because that's going to benefit black people. Right? And you can now see the transcripts, because it's long enough in history, to see that they weren't hiding that at all, but they said, well, we can't come out and say that. So what we're going to do is we're going to say that this law goes for everyone except farm workers and domestic workers. And to this day, if you look at the National Labor Relations Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act, there is an exclusion. Farm workers and domestic workers do not have the same protections under the law, which is why we have rampant wage theft and sexual abuse and no overtime pay, child labor, all of this happening amongst our farm working population. There was just a bill introduced, Justice for Farm Workers, y'all should vote for it. So at the same time, you know, black farmers, a lot of black farmers were hanging on. Not everybody left, you know, a lot of people stayed. But the government wasn't much help at all either. Because, you know, the history of farming has really been a history in a lot of ways of white affirmative action. And what I mean by that is that the federal government has given away millions of acres of land through the Homestead Act, provided free education through the land-grant colleges, low interest loans, crop allotments and crop insurance, and technical assistance through the Extension Agency to help support white farmers getting an economic footing. Black farmers were systematically denied these supports, creating an unfair market playground, so to speak. And as a result, black farmers started losing their land, to the point where in 1982, the US Commission on Civil Rights said the extinction of the black farmer will be the blood on the hands of the USDA. USDA is the #1 cause for the decline in the black farmer from 14% of the nation's farms to 1%. And so this here is actually a march on Washington that preceded a lawsuit, the 1999 Pickford v. Glickman lawsuit, which was settled as the largest civil rights settlement between black farmers and the federal government for those decades of discrimination. Though unfortunately, by the time it was settled, most of the farmers were in their 90s and had lost their land. So then we get up to the north, right? And it's like supposed to be all right, finally. But this whole like stolen land, exploited labor thing continues. And so when you get up to the north, you find that there's a different way of being unable to access property and being unable to access food, and that's called redlining. So also started in the 1930s, Federal Housing Administration commissions these maps to be drawn, right? Does anyone ever go on Zillow? So I went on Zillow just a month ago and looked up the neighborhoods where we deliver our food as a farm, which are poor neighborhoods, predominantly people of color, and they were outlined in red. Why was I shocked? I was really shocked. That was supposed to be illegal since 1977. But go on Zillow, look up a poor black neighborhood, it will be outlined in red, still. Because what the government did is it made these maps, it outlined different neighborhoods according to how desirable they were. The people of color neighborhoods were red, and they told banks, don't lend there, it's not safe to lend. And they also gave out language for zoning laws that prevented the intermixing of inharmonious racial groups. In fact, if you get a deed in some of these rural areas, I bet even in New Hampshire, sometimes it will still have on the deed like that you can't sell it to a person of color. I've seen these in my town. They're supposed to scratch it out, you know. But, so point being, what happens, right? What happens when you can't get a mortgage? Well, you can't own property then. You're a renter, right? And when you can't own property, you can't pass on wealth. And 80% of the wealth that we have in this country is inherited. Most of it is property. So when a white child is born today in this country, they already have 16 times as much wealth as the average black child. They didn't earn that, right, at birth, because of a legacy of who can own property and who can pass on property. And so your zip code gets to determine a whole lot about your life, like where you go to school, whether you have food to eat, whether you can get medical care, and so on. Any idea where this young person is? Food pantry. Exactly. 1 in 3 black children will go to bed hungry tonight. 1 in 6 white children. And so what this demonstrates is that a food system built on stolen land and stolen labor also hurts us all the way through. So we have here a situation in our country where folks of color are more likely to be hungry, more likely to have diabetes, heart disease, obesity, cancer, diet-related illnesses of all kinds. Not because we don't know how to cook, right? Or not motivated, but because if you live in a neighborhood where if you have a few dollars in your pocket and all you can get is like hot Cheetos and blue drink, which is subsidized by the USDA, you're not going to be able to get those life-fortifying foods that allow you to get a good education and to participate in civic life and to have a long and healthy and resilient existence, right? Not because you didn't try, but because your zip code. We have a situation in our country still with farm workers where, as I mentioned, there is not equal protection under the law, right? If you work in a farm with less than 7 people, there is no federal minimum wage. None. There might be a state minimum wage, but there's no federal minimum wage. You know, 85% of our food is grown by people who speak Spanish as their first language and identify as Latinx or Hispanic. 2% of our farms are managed by people who identify as Latinx or Hispanic. So a huge gaping disparity in terms of power and privilege amongst farm workers and farmers. And finally, the land is more skewed by racial ownership than ever before in our history. In the 2012 USDA census, excluding reservation lands that are uncropped, 98% of the rural land is controlled by white people in this country, higher than ever. I had this interview with ABC News that kind of cracked me up because they were like, can you justify why we need a diverse population of farmers? And I was like, can you justify why 98% of the land should be owned by white people? Like, we need to shift the question. Like, how? There's plenty to share, but it can't be all one group, right? And of course, all of this is trashing the planet at the same time, right? And so when we're not using this cultural knowledge, these Afro-Indigenous methods that were braided in with the seeds in our ancestors' hair, we have agriculture being the #1 driver of climate change, the #1 driver of land convergence, the #1 driver of water withdrawals, and all of this because we're neglecting and appropriating this sacred knowledge. So the food system, it's working as it was designed, but we're in trouble. We're in trouble. And we're going to talk about how to fix it. It's not that hard. But first, I want to give you a chance to talk to each other just for a minute. So I would encourage you to turn to a person next to you, and don't worry, you do not have to marry them. You are just talking to them for like 1 minute. So be brave. But ask them, where were your ancestors in this history, and how are your people connected to these past events? And then I'll have a couple of you share out. So take a minute to
of the Great Migration. And she always raised me saying, baby, I was a slave on that plantation. And I would go to school, and the school would tell me, no, she was a sharecropper. But now that I understand the logistics, she didn't have control over her life. And the people who fled the plantations and and things like that in the South, it was because of the things that Leah's sharing with us today. So that's my story.
One more person want to share?
So I come from ranchers in Mexico, and my grandpa Pedro was a bracero, and he would talk about going through. So this is like, so northern Mexico, and then like going through the country, and he would mention Montana, and he said he was treated so terribly that he decided like I would never live in this country because just of how bad he was being treated for being Mexican, and he would talk about like certain places he couldn't eat or couldn't use the restrooms and like treatment. So yeah, his thing, like after that experience, he just never, and he never did. They never moved over to the U.S.
I have a friend who's an ag professor in the Midwest, and he asked a room full of students, like probably about this big, who all want to be farmers. He was like, how much would you need to be paid to work at the meat packing plant in town? By hour, what do you think? Well, how much would you all need to be paid to work at a meat packing plant? Anyone do it for 50? 20?
20.
20, raise your hand for 20, 25, 30, $50 an hour? Okay. So 100% of the students said there's no amount of money that you could pay me to work at the meat packing plant. Yes. Because it's dangerous, you get repetitive stress injuries, it's disgusting, it's degrading, your slaughter rate is 3,000 hogs an hour, right? Totally inhuman conditions. And they were saying, oh, and besides, that's Mexican work, is what the students said. Yeah, that's what the student, all white group of students. And so it made me think about, though, I mean, it's easy to sort of demonize them, but we've actually created a food system where we have international trade agreements that are so onerous that people are forced to leave their own farms and their own family to cross a border into a hostile environment to work for sub-minimum wage and be subjected to harassment and sexual violence, right, in a degrading condition in order to just survive, and doing work that white Americans with documents are not willing to do. That's a food system that we're all complicit in, right? And so it's easy to say, oh, how could they? But it's given me a great deal of pause, right? So let's talk about action, though. Let's talk about then what can we do? Because I really believe that if we just go to the dining hall and eat our food and don't think about it, then we're complicit, right? That's our vote for the status quo. You can't be a passive anti-racist. There's no such thing. But neither are you obligated to fix it all. So for us at Soul Fire Farm, what we had to ask ourselves is, what is the intersection between what the world needs and what makes us come alive? What is that intersection? And for us, it was about supporting the Black and brown community to feed ourselves, to reclaim the seeds in the hair, to reclaim that ancestral knowledge. And the amazing thing is that we don't have to do that. We don't have to make that up, because that knowledge has been kept every generation and it inspires our work. So there's 3 basic things that we're up to at Soulfire Farm. One is running the farm, which I'll tell you a little bit about. The other is our education and training, and the third is reparations. Reparations, which comes from a root of repair. So first, feeding people. You know, because I don't really believe in like Twitter activism or armchair activism. That's not a thing. You gotta be doing something real that actually the community needs. So we run a farm. We started, we got the land in 2006. We opened in 2011. And we're on 80 acres. We grow vegetables. We raise chickens for eggs and meats. We grow herbs and fruits and all the things, like diversified horticulture, right? And what happens though is we take all that food and we box it up every Wednesday into these boxes and deliver it to the people who need it most in our community. So we have about 100 families, 300 or 400 individuals who receive that box of food, and it's on a sliding scale. So depending how much money you have, you pay according to that. And folks with more access to wealth subsidize those with less. One of the things I'm most excited about is our solidarity share. So we have this commitment that if a refugee is resettled into our community, that the neighbors will make sure they have vegetables, right? A weekly delivery of vegetables, which is important for many reasons, as you can imagine, in this political climate. But also, think about what happens when someone comes from their homeland, where likely they were a smallholder farmer, they ate Whole Foods, and then they're resettled next to like the KFC and the McDonald's, right? With no supermarket, no farmer's market, in what the USDA would call a food desert, we would call food apartheid. Quickly, the Western diseases start cropping up. So we actually partnered with a health clinic to get in at that intervention point and make sure that refugee families got this good food. Just a picture of like a typical summer bounty beautifulness. But of course, we didn't come up with this idea of feeding the community, right? We were inspired by these folks. Anyone know who they are?
Black Panthers.
Black Panthers. That's the Black Panthers, exactly. So they're known for, you know, armed self-defense, which certainly happened. But you know, they were spending about 90% of their time doing what they called survival programs, which was feeding 20,000 Oakland children breakfast every morning. It was running health clinics. It was driving elders to their appointments and family members to visit incarcerated loved ones and giving out groceries. Because like us, they were really rooted in, we can't just have this theoretical stuff going on, we gotta do something real for the community. So we shout out to the Black Panthers. They're the reason why we have free breakfast in schools. And all this food we're growing, you know, in a way that actually makes the earth better. If you haven't read Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, you need to read this to understand that the earth and the humans have been friends and we can be friends again. Because what happened with colonization, right? Within one generation of settlers coming to the Great Plains, they reduced the amount of organic matter in the topsoil from an average of 8 to 10% to about 2 or 3%. More than a 50% decrease in organic matter. And the sciencey and farming people will know how catastrophic that is, because not only does that destroy your fertility and the life in your soil, it also puts all the carbon in the atmosphere. That became the first big spike in atmospheric carbon dioxide, was the tilling of the Great Plains. We inherited our land with 2.5% organic matter. It's now 12% organic matter, because we call the life back in. We use Afro-Indigenous technologies, right? Semi-permanent raised beds, heavy mulches, cover cropping, all of these technologies that help make the earth better. But the most important technology actually has nothing to do with the physical. So I'll tell you this quick story. When I was living in Ghana, West Africa, one of the places I learned to farm with these like badass OG grandmas named the Queen Mothers, they had a favorite game they liked to play, which was Quiz Leah about life in the United States. I would like go into their home, the compound where they had everything going on, and they'd be like, Amita Day was my name there. Amita Day, come. Is it true that in the United States, the men will be stirring the soup pots and the women will be adding the pepper? Yeah, that's true. We cook together. They thought that was really funny because it's different gender norms. And the next day, like, Amidede, come. Is it true that in the United States, the farmer will put the seed into the ground and they will not pour any libation, they will not sing or dance or pray or say thank you, and they expect the seed to grow? Yup. They said, that's why you're all sick. That's why you're sick, because you see the earth as a commodity, you see the earth as a material thing, and you can just take and extract and never even look and see if there was consent. So don't tell me, don't come back to Ghana and tell me that you did that. I want to hear from you that you were dancing and you were giving thanks and praise and you were asking permission. So here we are looking like fools, but that's what we do, right? That's what we do. We have ceremony. We treat the earth as what she is, which is alive. And of course, we didn't start this whole idea of like sustainable farming. Anyone know who that is on the top left? Yeah, I was like, don't let me down, y'all. George Washington Carver, who at least if you've done like Black History Month in elementary school, you probably was like, he invented 1,000 peanut products. But the reason George Washington Carver, who's a professor at Tuskegee University, 1800, was so into the peanut is because it's a legume. And scientists, again, you're with me here, like legumes are magical alchemists. They're like, hey, rhizobial bacteria, come here. I've got a nice little home for you in my root, and I'll feed you a little sugar, and all you have to do is breathe nitrogen out of the air and turn it into an organic form so I can have some, right? And so it's magic, it's amazing, it's what makes plants grow. But George Washington Carver recognized this and came up with a way of restoring all the depleted southern soils by doing rotational cover cropping. And he would quote Bible verses to try to convince people that they were going to go to hell if they didn't do cover cropping. I mean, he was really serious. You should read his speeches. He was really serious. And he'd get a room full of farmers like this in the fall and tell them, oh, y'all think you're done because you harvested, but you are not done. You need to go rake up the leaves from the forest and get the muck from the swamp and make compost piles and spread those around, right? And then plant your cover crops. So really, really incredible. A whole generation before Rodale, he was teaching organic agriculture. He is the, quote, father of organic or regenerative agriculture in the United States. Also started the first extension agency out of Tuskegee. It was called The Movable Schoolhouse That Goes to the Negro Farmer, 1895. This one right here, anyone know this person? That's Watley, Booker T. Watley. He was a really marketing genius. So, you know, black farmers weren't making any money. They couldn't get into the wholesale markets for tobacco and cotton. So he's like, here's what we're gonna do. Forget the monocropping. You're gonna plant fruits and vegetables. Get those city folks who are just missing the country. You're gonna get them to be members of your farm. They will come out and they will harvest. They will pay you to harvest. And we're gonna call it Pick Your Own. Has anyone ever done apple picking? Yeah, right? Call it Pick Your Own, and you'll have like a newsletter, so they'll feel connected to the farm, and they'll get wholesale prices because they're paying a membership fee every year. So that was the first CSA, Community Supported Agriculture, and the first Pick Your Own. So we're building off of what they did. The second thing that we're up to, of three things, is our education and training. Because time and again, we heard from black and brown folks who wanted to be farmers that they just couldn't get into training programs, couldn't find anything they could afford or that was in their region. So we started our Black, Latinx, Indigenous farmer training. It's super amazing. Almost everybody is growing food for their community. But what's most profound about that is the legacy that it builds on. Does anyone know her?
Fannie Lou Hamer.
Fannie Lou Hamer. My favorite thing that Fannie Lou Hamer ever said was, if you have 400 quarts of greens and gumbo soup canned for the winter, nobody can push you around and tell you what to do. So she started an educational farm that Soul Fires modeled after called Freedom Farm. It was an intentional community with 79 families in Sunflower County, Mississippi. They, from their vegetable sales and their hog sales, they were able to fund scholarships and burial fees and education, you know, for their members. We also have modeled our education programs off the work of Shirley and Charles Sherrod, who started the first ever community land trust in the United States in 1969. 5,000 acres, no, 6,700 acres, 500 families. Long story short about them, white folks around them were so threatened, they actually bombed their offices, and they became one of the plaintiffs in the Pickford v. Glickman case. But again, this whole idea, like educational farms, not new. Not new. And then the third thing, so I'm just going to skip some for time, the third thing that we're up to is movement building. Because it's all fine and good if we're all educated and ready to farm, but if you can't get any land and you can't get any credit, right, you can only make it so far. And one of my mentors, Baba Curtis Muhammad, came over to visit the farm a couple years in, and he was like, oh, this is cute, you know, it's a little farm, growing food, you got some youth programs, it's nice. Let me tell you what real farmers do. He was like, real farmers in the civil rights movement were the backbone of everything that was going on. They provided all the housing, the food, the shelter, the shoe fixing, the meeting space, even the bail money. People would literally put up their land as collateral for bail money to get activists who were trying to get people registered to vote out of jail. He's like, you would roll up to a black farmer's house, and inside it would look like there was Bible study, like you peek in the curtain, all these Bibles, but there was pamphlets, voter registration pamphlets. It was a meeting, political meeting, disguised. But if the night riders still came and found you out, the night riders are the one that lynch people, the black farmers would go and cut down the trees across the only road into town to slow them down so the activists had time to get out, saving lives. He's like, there would literally be no civil rights movement without black farmers. No hotel was going to put this, like you can get a convention center in Georgia so you can do your voter registration, you know, plan. So he's like, so what are you doing again? What are you doing with your farm? So we decided to add another component of organizing and activism. So a lot of that has been training folks in uprooting racism, allowing people to use our farm as sanctuary for their organizing meetings, regardless of what type of political work they're doing. And specifically, we formed, together with a bunch of our alumni and other comrades, this reparations map. So reparations is a very, very important concept. Because if you don't think about reparations, you're kind of assuming that history doesn't exist. And we're all just kind of starting from today. Another mentor of mine, Ed Whitfield, put this really well. He said, imagine that your neighbor came over and stole your cow. A couple weeks later, your neighbor came back to your house with tears in their eyes of remorse and regret and apologized for stealing your cow. But they said, don't worry, I'll make it up to you. I'll make it up to you. Every week for the rest of the cow's life, I'm going to give you half a pound of butter. What would you say?
Give me the cow.
Give me my cow, right? It's not a trick question. Give me my cow, right? But unfortunately, a lot of what we do when we talk about like, oh, all this land was taken from indigenous people and the stolen labor from Latinx people, from black folks, we just say, oh yeah, but now it's all good and kumbaya and stuff. But it's like, if all the wealth is inherited and we never got any, how are we supposed to get that farm? Right? There actually has to be a giving back. There has to be a return and an acknowledgement. So the reparations map is really cool because it's a people-to-people voluntary reparation. So folks have resources, they can find a project near them on the map. It might be a tractor or $100, like whatever folks need. And then another really exciting project, we work nationally on policy, but another exciting regional project is we formed a land trust together with several indigenous tribes, including some Abenaki folks, and black and brown farmers, so that we have a 501c3 land trust organization that can then receive land donations and redistribute them to the community of farmers and earth keepers in the Northeast. So that's super exciting organizing work too. Again, we didn't make that up. Shout out to Chavez and Puerta and Eat Leong and the Immokalee workers and all those amazing, amazing organizers who stood up over the years for a just food system. I'm skipping the international stuff unless you ask it in the questions. So I just want to mention a few things ways that you all can get involved. And then I'm going to be so excited because after we talk about ways to get involved, my dear friend, Soulfire Farm board member, and super revolutionary, badass, world-renowned poet, musician, Taina Asili is going to sing a song inspired by the work of Soulfire. But we gotta make sure y'all have homework, right? Raise your hand if you eat food. Okay, good. Raise your hand if you live on land. No boathouses? Anybody? Okay, one boathouse. So then we all have a responsibility, right? Actually, none of us are off the hook. And it doesn't have to be like your whole life's mission to have racial justice in the food system, but there's something all of us can do. And the awesome news is that you don't have to make up what to do. So Soulfire Farm, together with a national organization called the Heal Food Alliance, interviewed hundreds of black and brown farmers to say what needs to change in the food system, and created a platform, which you can find on our website. You can look at it. It has policy changes, it has community-based changes, person-to-person changes, all the things. So you don't have to make it up. And it's really important because one of the dangers that we can get into is something that I call the savior complex. We call it savior complex, which is when you think you know better than the people who are experiencing a problem, right? So say, for example, I wanted to organize to stop anti-Semitism, right? Who should I ask about that? Jewish people, that would make sense, right? What if I wanted to organize to support veterans' rights? Who should I ask about that? Veterans, you guys are brilliant. This is excellent. The problem is, somehow when we get to racism, instead of being like, let me check and see what communities of color think we should do, it's like, I know what y'all need. You need a mobile market, you need this kale cooking class in your elementary school, and I'm gonna teach it, right? All the things, so this happens a lot in our communities, when in fact, what we really need is for people to be listening and offering resources to existing work, supporting the work rather than trying to take over. So there's a lot of specifics about that, but I think that's the fundamental starting place, is that listening frame of mind, that sort of take off your shoes, humble frame of mind when it comes to it. To super emphasize that, we're going to do one last call and response to name some of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of black and brown-led organizations working on food justice that you can look up and see how to support. So the way this call and response works is I say, I have a shout, and you all say, out, in unison. So I have a shout. Out. Awesome. And then I'll say one of the organizations, and then together we'll say, may your strength be strengthened. So let's try that. May your strength be strengthened. I have a shout. Out. For the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance.
May your strength be strengthened.
I have a shout.
Out.
For the National Black Food Injustice Alliance.
May your strength be strengthened.
I have a shout.
Out.
For the Southeastern African American Organic Farmers Network.
May your strength be strengthened.
I have a shout.
Out.
For Familias Unidas por la Justicia.
May your strength be strengthened.
I have a shout.
Out.
For Via Campesina.
May your strength be strengthened.
I have a shout.
Out.
For the Federation of Southern Cooperatives.
May your strength be strengthened.
I have a shout.
Out.
For the Heal Food Alliance.
May your strength be strengthened.
I have a shout.
Out.
For the Native Land Conservancy.
May your strength be strengthened.
I have a shout.
Out.
For all of you in this room.
May our strength be strengthened.
Here's just some faces to put with some of those orgs. These are real, wonderful, beautiful colleagues. And at this point, I am going to invite out my wonderful friend Taina to sing to you a beautiful song. Please welcome. I think before I start, we should give a round of applause to Leah Penniman. I just want to, I gave her some instructions, so she's good at it. I just want to say, Leah, that, you know, though I'm a board member of Soulfire Farm, I've seen this farm grow since its beginnings, and just coming here today and watching this presentation, it never ceases to amaze and inspire me. And this song is about, it came from that inspiration. It actually came from an interview that I did with Leah about her journey into becoming the farmer and educator that she is today. So this song is very much inspired by her, and you can see that interview online. I can share the link later on, but it's on the Soulfire Farm Facebook page. But this song is very much inspired by this work, so I wanted to share it with you today. This is my declaration to be fully alive here. actually clap this together. Can we come together as a musician group to clap this out? So let's see here. No, I won't give up, I won't settle. Till the soul you're lifted in my head to lift up. No, I won't give up, I won't settle. This is what I'm here to do. Dig the path returning us to land. Ancestors calling from the depths of the earth. Dig the path returning us to land. Let it be our medicine. 'Cause all that we is and knows in the sea, a precious memory and a pain to sovereignty. Hey, let me a pain to sovereignty as I plant that seed. Hey, oh, I'm memory, I hope, I'm sovereignty. 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 Thank you all so much. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, it's time for a few questions if folks have any, and then I'll be like great too. Anyone have a question?
Just dope. I just wanted to hear you speak more about how, so you talk about technologies, and I think a lot of times when we talk about technology, we think of like the latest and greatest, quote unquote, or what's on a screen or whatever. And what I really appreciate about your presentation is that you're saying like we have these technologies that have been around and are actually, in some ways, are more efficient or work better for our own communities and for the earth than like the factory farming that we do, or like using drones in the sky to like watch for like crop changes or whatever. Like there are already technologies taking care of that stuff. So I just wanted to hear you say more about that. Also, because we all tend to think technology means like white or European, right?
No, I super appreciate that. I think the thing that changed my mind about that was this study that this 1949 USDA study that I read about Egypt. And it was saying that the amount of worm castings across the Nile River area was 10 to 40 times that anywhere in the United States. And it turns out that Cleopatra knew that worms made the very best soil. So she made it illegal to harm a worm on pain of death, which is really intense. And also had a full like cadre of priests whose full-time study was dedicated to the habits of earthworms and how to augment them. So she sheet vermicomposted her entire empire, right? That's technology. Like that was the cradle of agriculture, that's technology. And so technology is innovation that makes our lives better. It's been really important to go back and reclaim. And it's not that we don't adapt and modify as we go forward, but we don't have to throw out these really brilliant like ways of being. So thanks for reflecting that back.
Hi, Leah, thank you. So the really cool thing is that good ideas, when they don't get crushed, are contagious. So I would love to hear you talk about just ways, clearly what you're doing needs to multiply. And so I'd just like to hear a little bit about how the tendrils have started to go out during the years you've been doing what you've been doing.
I so appreciate that you frame it as tendrils, because we definitely got some pressure to franchise and get really big, but that would actually destroy what's authentic and beautiful and magical about Soulfire, that we can all be at a kitchen table and look in each other's eyes as a team. So we're into spiritual biomimicry, right? So the forest, when it wants to grow bigger, you know, Grandma Tree's like, hey, Brother Mycelium, can you take some of my sugars over there to my kiddos so they can grow bigger and maybe pass a message that the bugs are coming? You know, and while you're at it, I'm gonna kick you some sugar and you're gonna kick me some minerals because I can't drink rocks, right? So there's a whole relationship. And that allows the forest to flourish. And so we think of ourselves as a hub tree in that same way, where we're sending out resources so that others can grow. What does that mean tangibly? It means that Catatumbo immigrant-owned farm co-op in Chicago is run by 5 of our alumni. It means that Harmony Farm and Homestead in Western Massachusetts is run by our alumni on a gift of land from a white alum of our anti-racism training. It means that Keisha Cameron outside of Atlanta, Georgia, who's an alum of our program, is running a organic, hog farm training for black farmers in the South who are conventional. So there's all of these sibling projects, right, that are sprouted up and supported by this beautiful family that is Soulfire Farm, and that's the way we like it.
Go about starting to learn about your ancestral practices and kind of real history in some ways instead of what we're fed in the school system.
Yeah, I almost quit farming. So I started when I was 16. I was a kid in the food project in Boston, Mass. And the second year that they existed, so way back in the day. And I totally fell in love with farming, that elegant simplicity of seed to harvest and helping the community, all the things. And then I started farming at rural farms and quickly became disillusioned. I honestly had this question about whether I was being a traitor to my people because my folks were interested in stopping gun violence and education reform, and here I am with these white hippies doing environmental things, and I almost quit farming. And I was at a Northeast Organic Farming Conference in Massachusetts, the big summer one, and I literally went around with little slips of paper and profiled every person with melanin. It was just meet me under this tree at 1 o'clock. There was maybe 6 or 7 of us in the whole conference, including Karen Washington, who's become a mentor of mine. She's a black farmer, and she said, there's more to this story. I can't tell you what it is, but I think you're gonna unearth it, and one day we'll have our own conference. And she actually started the Black Farmers Conference in 2010, right? But it was that moment that just gave me an idea that there was more. And all you need is a hypothesis, because as soon as you hit the literature, if you're origins of raised beds, the Ovambo people in Namibia, if you're origins of terraces, simultaneously in the Mixteca and in what is now Kenya called Fanyaju, it really doesn't take that much effort to find the anthropological studies. All you need is the belief that it's there. So that's why Farming While Black is a book that is written to my 16-year-old self, because I needed that book to know that I belonged, in the world of sustainable ag. Maybe just one more question and then we'll hang out.
I actually work on a farm. It's actually a queer-owned farm. And I work in a farmer's market on the weekends. So this past weekend, I had someone from the UNH Cooperative Extension, which is a really good program. All the farmers that I work with, they love the program, they love the students. But I could see the physical discomfort when she came walking by. What are some tips that you could give, people who are in these, spaces like the UNH Cooperative Extension with the power positions to, reach out to younger people, people of color?
Well, first of all, I'm really sorry that you had to experience that. I think a lot of people, we call those microaggressions, right? And that can kind of discourage you from being in a space. And I really appreciate that you put the onus on white folks and folks in positions of power to say, what can I do about this? And I do think it starts with self-education. And self-education doesn't mean going out to people of color and being what can I do? Right? Because there's all this incredible literature and trainings out there. So if every organization, every organization should go through at least a 101 anti-racism training, like People's Institute or Fierce Allies or something. Every white person should read White Fragility and the Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States and Cumulative Holocaust. These basic literature, basic exposure, and that I think awakens a consciousness that there'll be self-awareness in moments like that, of oh, even if I'm feeling things, I'm not gonna wipe that on this person and make them feel uncomfortable, right? So I would say, educate ourselves. Thanks everyone so much. Come get a book.